Welcome to Scrolling to Death. You guys are in for a treat. So, this is an episode of Teachers Talk here on Scrolling to Death. I got to connect with Jessica Moore, who is a teacher in Alaska. She has had a front row seat to seeing how screens are affecting preteens in her classroom. There's a lot to learn here for parents. A lot of takeaways. Jessica and I go in a lot of different directions. So, I hope you enjoy this conversation and continue to make safe decisions around tech for our kids. This episode is sponsored by Bark Technologies. I am truly grateful as a parent that we have safer options for our kids. We don't have to default to an iPhone. The Bark phone helps families with young kids or teenagers ramp up online safety, really protect our kids, get alerts if something harmful happens or comes across their feed. We can really manage their entire digital experience safely. More on Bark in the episode notes, but let's get into my conversation with Jessica Moore. I haven't gotten legislation passed is because big tech spends so many millions of dollars lobbying against it in states, like little bills that just are for Mississippi, or I was just talking about this dad with.
Yeah.
The big tech companies showed up to lobby against his bill and it didn't go through. And it's like, or bigger bills like Kids Online Safety Act that could have protected children. It could have saved children's lives already.
And I think as parents, we have this false sense of security that, like, I trust my government and I vote and I do all of these things. And I think, like, we, in good faith, think that technology is wonderful and our kids, and they would never, sorry, it makes me emotional, that our kids would never intentionally be harmed. And it's like, there's, and I wish I could scream that from the mountaintops to every parent. There are no safety measures. You are it. As a parent, you are it. And I think that's just where I sorry. I don't mean to get emotional about
Yeah.
it, but
it's okay. And that is not fair because parents are fighting a losing battle. We're, doing our best, letting our kids have some kind of access so they can just socialize. And then they're getting quick added with, predators or drug dealers, or they're getting served suicide videos. Like,
that's the part that's so concerning to me as both an educator, as a parent, as a human, to go, I know so many parents who are brilliant, well-educated, kind, intentional parents that have no idea what's going on. And that's what's scary to me. And I tell kids in my class all the time, like, you're never going to see this information unless you go thoroughly search for it. Because is the media going to put this information out there? Are these statistics? They're not going to show up across your feed.
Yeah.
P.S. You've been scrolling TikTok for 3 hours and this is wildly detrimental to your health. Sorry, we're going to stop our, no, that's never going to happen. And so I think it's such a daunting thing as a parent to go, how do I be intentional about this? How do I protect my kid? I think so often, Nikki, I have young kids. I have a 2.5-year-old and a 4.5-year-old. And I go, I think about all the thought that's gone into their sleep schedules, safe sleep, their vaccine schedules, the foods that we introduce, all of these things. And it's like, technology, I would argue, or just, not even my opinion, the research shows, like, that's more dangerous than anything that we have to face as parents. So
yeah, I know. And I think that historically we thought more tech is going to be great. Like, they're going to be tech experts and they're going to have great jobs in tech and they're going to learn so much from these devices and it's going to be so great. And it was the tech companies telling us this through their funded research and their lobbying and all these things. So,
and to be fair,
we fell for it.
Well, and to be fair, I even, like, when I look at my own tech use, like in my 20s, I'm in my upper 30s now, and I look at my own tech use and I go, oh my God, that was so wildly problematic. But I am someone who always, like, I don't want your anecdotal research. I don't want your own opinion. I don't want your own experience. I want to see what the research says. I've always been like that. Like, I am easily swayed by people's opinions, or I empathize with people and go, okay, I trust you. It's, and a false sense of security in good faith, thinking that these tech companies, I'm like, well, they would never intentionally harm children. Who would do that? And so, but now we have the benefit of some longitudinal research.
Right.
Of some, it's there and it's coming out. And that's where I kind of got into this space of like, oh my God, I read a couple books and being in, I teach sixth grade. I teach fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, but sixth
Mm-hmm.
graders, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my God, you guys put your phones down. This is so catastrophic. And so
Yeah.
it's just one of
Oh, and I
the,
imagine teachers just being so, it must be sad because you only have so much power and you know these kids are going home and just on their phone all night or in their bedroom after bedtime. And you must just be like,
and so
I don't have the power. I just want to control all of it.
I'll share with you. Such, um, I have such an incredible opportunity because I have kids for 3 years. So I teach a Montessori
Cool.
school, a Montessori
Mm,
public charter in Alaska. And so I
mm-hmm,
get kiddos in fourth grade. And so I get
mm-hmm.
them right at that cusp of
Yeah.
where, like, most of them are wanting phones. If they don't have a phone, they're wanting a phone, and they want a smartphone and
Mm-hmm.
they want an iPhone. And they're obsessed with knowing what kind of phone I have, which is ironic. Like, oh, do you have
Mm,
a list? My iPhone is like 6 years old because I'm
mm-hmm.
like,
Yeah.
man, I'm refusing to get a new one. But
Mm-hmm.
and so being able to share this information and share some of the statistics with them and talk to them about their own tech use. And
Mm-hmm.
so I get them in fourth grade and I have them all the way to sixth grade. And so they
Mm-hmm.
become my family. I feel like I have 25 kids, and to where I get to say, I love
Yeah.
you so much. This is so bad for you. Here's why.
I know.
And I
Oh,
feel like
yeah.
that I'm so blessed in that they know that I love them, and so they'll listen more. But I have,
Mm-hmm.
sixth grade girls who will come and talk to me about their tech use.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard because it's that weird nuanced thing where it's like, okay, well, your parents might say this is okay, but here's what the
Mm-hmm.
statistics would show you is that you're
Yeah.
at higher risk of depression and anxiety. The more you use this,
Yeah.
it's a correlation. And so anyway, yeah,
Yeah. I kind of love the teachers staying with the classroom for multiple years. I've been looking at the Waldorf schools and learning about those and that they
phenomenal.
stay for preferably 8 years. I just think that that is fascinating and really great. Like, I'm watching at the end of my kids last year. So they're second and God, first and second grade award ceremonies, and the teachers are giving an award to them. And
Yeah.
it's like the most unpersonalized like
Mhm.
sentence. And I'm like, you don't even know my kid.
So
Like, I just feel so bad.
it's funny you say that. I say all the time, at the end of a kid's fourth grade year, I'm just starting to figure out as their teacher what makes them tick. How I
Yeah.
say all the time, like, that's when I'm learning what their love language is, how they receive love in the
Hmm.
classroom, because that's like the basis of teaching. If like you don't, it comes down to relationship, and
Hmm.
if they don't feel
Yeah.
loved, like it's that hierarchy of needs. So I
Yeah.
say all the time, like, I don't think I could ever just teach a straight grade
Yeah.
because of the benefits that come with rolling. And so, yeah, if you're considering it, I cannot say enough good things. Like, by
Hmm.
the time a kid leaves in sixth grade, like, and same thing, they know me. They know that
Hmm.
it's just a really beautiful relationship. And yeah, I
Hmm.
don't think I could ever go back. So there's
I
a lot
know.
of good that comes with, and especially like family relationships too, building families. Like when I have
Hmm.
to share hard things with parents, when they
Yeah.
know that, like, well, you've had my kid, or like, I'm so blessed in that I will have families. So I'll have one kid for
Hmm.
3 years. And then their
Hmm.
sibling
Oh.
will come in, and then their sibling, like, I have
Hmm.
one family I've had for, I think, 9 years. I've had one of their kids.
Whoa.
I
How
love them.
cute.
And yeah, and it's just it's,
Oh.
and so again, when I have to share hard things, which there's a lot of that in teaching,
Yeah.
they know it comes from a place of genuine love and
Yeah.
empathy and compassion as a parent. Like, parenting is
Hmm.
like this whole space that we're in right now. I also want to say, like, there's zero judgment. It is so hard to be a parent in today's world
Yeah.
with all the
Yeah.
noise and all the judgment. And like,
Hmm.
I genuinely believe that we all want to do right by our kids. Like, no one would
Hmm.
intentionally make a poor choice for their children for the sake of it's
Hmm.
easier or it taxifies. Like, that's the tricky part
Yeah.
about tech.
Yeah. And that's one big message I'm trying to push is stop blaming parents because I'm getting just a lot of comments.
Yeah, it is.
um,
Like,
s-
parenting is hard enough. That's what I like
yeah.
when I read. when you see the research, or there's a couple books that I think like I feel like they should hand you a copy when you leave the hospital. Like, here you go.
Yeah.
Because I say all the time, like the research is not that's always amazing to me. The research is not out there in a way that I would think would be easily consumable for a busy parent.
Right.
Or that's why, like, I'm so grateful for your podcast. I can put one ear in and do chores, and like, there's a couple like yours that it's like this information is so important. But as busy parents, like, I can barely get my kids out the door in the morning. Like, I don't have time to sit down and read.
No, and consolidate, and then also, yeah. Yeah. It's hard, and weed through all of the. Also, there's just so much spending by big tech on research, so you have to weed through like who's this funded by,
and understand like exactly who's funding the research.
Yeah.
Vet a source. That's one thing that's been so, like, I wrote down some points that like I wanted to discuss a little bit, and one of them is just speaking of vetting a source. Like, I think as adults we understand, if big tech is funding this study, you can skew statistics in so many ways. You really can. And I think the disinformation for parents and the disinformation for kids that, I can always tell my kiddos who have access to social media, because the things that they come to school saying, it's like, and, I have to be very, very calm and very, like, I can never let my opinion known. I have to be a very benign medium, but it's like, where did you hear that? And it's just, we're living in a really bizarre time, because kids are taking that. They don't know how to vet a source. They don't understand the nuanced things behind research.
Well, and TikTok is a bad one for like selling kids lies, and TikTok tells kids in so many words, trust us. Don't trust your parents. Don't trust your teachers. Don't trust anyone. This is where you're going to get the real information. And this is where you should go to when you're having a problem, is come to TikTok. There's literal videos. Basically, that's like what it's saying to a kid.
So we've talked a lot. I'll share with you a funny story this year, and it actually happened a couple years ago. But I was teaching a lesson. We do use technology in our school. So even though we're a Montessori school, our upper elementary, we have a one-to-one computer. I have a computer cart in my room. Each kid gets assigned one. We use it for research and things like that, which I like. Again, I am not an anti-tech person. I think that we use it responsibly. But it's the entertainment technology, it's the entertainment, the social media for kids, I think that is extremely problematic. But anyway, I was teaching a lesson on how to cite or find a credible source. We look at .edu, and I went into this big thing, .org. That can be a an okay source. And then I went to .gov, and I had a couple kids say, well, .gov's not good. Like, you can't trust the government. And I'm like, oh, which, I mean, hey, we want to raise critical thinkers. We want to like entertain opinions that are not of our own and have civil discourse. But it's like, for a 9-year-old to say, well, we don't trust .gov. It's like, oh, that's interesting, things like that. And so,
and like, where are they getting that from, you know?
And it's just, and there's been a couple of things like that throughout. I've been teaching, I think, 10 years now. And it's like, it's just, we're living in a really interesting time where, I just would ask every parent to like not go into handing when your kid gets a smartphone, like, don't do it because of societal pressure or peer pressure or their friends have one. It has to be something that you as a family research, you as a family sit down and, hear each other out, have a conversation, show your kids. I think so often, as parents and as teachers, when we're dealing with teens and preteens, even 9-year-olds to, let's say, 14-year-olds, I think so often we dumb things down for them when we shouldn't. Like, for me, like, you'll appreciate this. I have the anxious generation and
beautiful
supplemental notes. I put that data up for kids. That did you know that since the smartphone has, come online, girls in the US, their anxiety rates have risen astronomically. Their depression rates, there's been a 145% increase in depression. It's correlated with smartphone and social media use. Like,
Yeah.
kids aren't dumb. And they are,
Right.
and I think so often when we don't share this information with them in a way that is collaborative, we miss out on that connection. That connection with our kid to say, I'm not the bad guy. I know you want a phone, but I can't in good conscience hand you something that's going to increase your chance of anxiety and depression in the most critical period of your life.
Right. And if you would think if parents knew that stat and really understood it, that they would just delay as long as possible, but that's not what is happening. But I do think these conversations can start really young. Like I just spoke in my little 3-year-olds class to 3 and 4-year-olds
Yeah.
about screens and what's good about them and bad about them, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then I talk to my almost 9-year-old a lot about, she overhears things that I do. And then she really has a disdain for like phones and things like that now. But
Yeah.
I told her I have an interview today with a dad, and she said, "Did the dad lose a child?" And I said, "Yes, to something that happened on social media." And so she has an understanding of how serious it can get. Now, obviously, I'll have to teach her how to use technology
Well,
and teach
and
her how
then
to use
it's
it
age appropriate
safely.
conversation too.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that that's brilliant parenting because kids innately also, something that I love to do with my 6th graders, we do this thing called middle school prep. And I think I shared with you that I teach on tech addiction. And it's like that age group, man, they innately want to fight the man. If you show them the statistics and the research, like
Ooh, good. Yeah.
I every year have kids say, like, I'm giving my phone back to my parents. This is wildly, like I always say the word wildly.
Cute. I love that.
This is wildly irresponsible. It's like, no, I agree. And to share with kids that there is no legislation in place to protect them.
Right.
That's the
I love that.
is I again, something I would implore every parent is to like not rest on the fact that like, oh, it's safe, everyone's doing it. No, it's not. Like I would like there are doctors and who have made their lives work exactly what we're talking about. They call that digital heroin. Would you give heroin to your 11-year-old? So it just it gets really messy.
It does. And I love the thought about that kids at this age, they don't want to be controlled, and teaching them that they are the product, teaching them that these platforms are addicting them and manipulating their thoughts and their decisions and their behavior through these algorithms. Like we can totally teach young teens and kids
We have
about
to teach
the
them
whole
that. That's because
situation.
we
Yeah.
can't, as parents, we can't be the enemy. We can't, it can't be that, well, you're just a mean mom who won't let me, you're trying to make me an outcast with my friends. Like I have these conversations in my classroom a lot. And like, so much of it comes down to where if I don't have a smartphone or if I don't have this, like I won't be able to get a hold of my parents, or I have a divorced family, so I need a smartphone, or how would my friends ever get a hold of me? I would have no social life. And so I get to have these conversations of, well, did you know that there's actually smartphones called a Gab phone or a Bark phone that allow you to be connected, but don't let scary strangers with the intent to harm you contact you. And so,
Exactly.
again, I would just encourage every parent to have those conversations with your kids and share the research. And there's a couple of really phenomenal books that, like, again, I don't know who in today's day and age has time to read, but one of them that really started my awakening with this space. It's called Wired Child. Have you read that?
No.
I have it right here. It's Wired Child. Okay. It's Richard Freed. He's PhD. He has a PhD.
Okay. Yeah.
He's
I'll get
an
that
adolescent psychologist. And that was written in 2015. And I got my hands on it probably 6 years ago. And even the research then was catastrophic. Like I got it and was like, oh God, this is bad. And
Yeah.
there's another one that I would recommend to all parents, and this is especially for parents. Like if you said you have a 3-year-old, I have a 2 and a 4-year-old. This is such a phenomenal
Hmm.
book. Have you heard of Spoiled
Okay.
Right?
No.
So it's Spoiled Right. It's written by Megan Owens. She's has a PhD. She's a counseling psychologist and a professor at Penn State University.
Okay. And it's RIGHT, spelled right.
Yep, Spoiled Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Got
And
it.
this
Thank
book
you.
for young toddlers or parents of young children, it
Hmm.
just beautifully condenses all of the research and makes it in
Hmm.
little tangible bites. Like again, I'm someone that like people's anecdotal experience. I'm like, oh, I can be swayed one way or the other, but the research
Hmm.
is very, very, very clear. And one thing that I would say is like teachers are tired. We are
Hmm.
very, I think if you spoke, and I've listened to some of your interviews with teachers, like we're all collectively tired. And I think especially like all for different reasons. But something
Yeah.
that I've noticed in just teaching in 10 years is that like attention fragmentation, just kids not being able to attune to a task, that's
Hmm.
gotten progressively worse.
Hmm.
And like
Yeah.
executive functioning with kids being able to self regulate and regulate their emotions when things get
Hmm.
hard or when they're in an uncomfortable space. So
Hmm.
younger kids, that's becoming less and less of a skill. And I really, and the research would show you, it's not just my opinion. It's
Hmm.
because of the a lot of times we're not allowing kids to experience boredom. We're
Hmm.
not allowing them, we're using entertainment technology to, and I get it, like I have toddlers. I
Yeah.
understand how hard it is sometimes to get things done. Um, but I think sometimes entertainment technology can become a crutch and it's depriving
Hmm.
kids of that real world experience to sit in an uncomfortable place to say, I'm
Hmm.
frustrated, I'm bored, I'm
Hmm.
angry, how do I deal with that? And so we're seeing
Yeah.
that come out on the other side. And that gets exhausting from a teaching perspective to where we're supposed to be teaching one thing, but now we're teaching emotional regulation that I'm not necessarily equipped to teach
Hmm.
to a group of 25
Interesting.
kids. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And I want to talk more about the effect of phones in the classroom and have some questions about that. But it's really interesting. It's interesting you mentioned research specifically related to this because I filmed a video and I wasn't going to post it because I feel like, do people really care about research? But I guess
I think they do. I
um,
mean, I hope they do. I
I know, but I don't get a lot of like, I feel like the stories really hit you, but I have to balance it out with research. And I typically do, but this one was about new study that proves that when you parents hand a digital device to kids during tantrums or meltdowns, there's really big short and long term effects
catastrophic. Yeah.
around self regulatory skills and
So this book
uh,
does a wonderful job of
okay,
condensing that information. Yeah, and I mean, just think about it. I think when you like
I
sit
know,
down as a parent and
yeah,
say, okay, my kid is, or we're gonna go to the grocery store, and then instead of teaching my kid that no, like our bottoms stay in the grocery cart, like this is boring, but we're gonna do
mm-hmm.
this together. You look and you see, and there again, there's no judgment because I've been there too,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, oh my God, someone turn on Miss Rachel, like
Yeah,
hand the
yeah,
phone, we're gonna pacify. But
uh-huh.
what that does is it bypasses their emotional, like kids are able to do that. Kids are able, the longer you do it, and it's a practice skill, it's a taught skill,
Mm-hmm.
and the more
Yeah.
opportunity we have to practice it, the better they are. The
Mm-hmm.
better
And that's how you learn something, right? Your brain learns a skill is practicing it over and over.
repetition, yeah,
And
repetition.
this study was interesting because it was saying that if you give the child a tablet a lot to deal with a big emotion or being uncomfortable, the child becomes unable to choose a deliberate response to a situation and can instead cannot control their reaction. So their actual
Yeah,
reactions to situations become even bigger and more crazy than if you just have sit through it and have them deal with it and then practice that skill. And also with brain development, it's like building blocks, so you miss that time frame where they're developing those,
there's
how to
sensitive
fire those
critical
neurons.
periods
It's like,
for every they're building blocks, and there's a critical period for each one. And emotional regulation, really, like, you look like, hopefully by 5 we're zoning in on that, and hopefully we're nailing that down. And I would argue, just like as a, and actually I keep saying I would argue, but the research supports that we have to explicitly teach those skills too. Kids do not know how to innately calm themselves down or to ride a wave, or they go into fight or flight. There's a ton of brain research about that. And when we rob them of those opportunities to learn that skill, then it just becomes harder and harder. And then it just, because, you know, the saying of like, they wire together, they fire together, the more you use it in your brain. And I've been able to watch that in my own 2 kids. They both have very sensitive temperaments. It has not been easy to, especially my 4-year-old. He's incredible and super intelligent and the most empathetic kid, but he, you know, 2 to 3, I thought we were like gonna die, just because, you know, I knew the brain research. Like my bachelor's is in early childhood education, so I'm like, I know all the development, I know all the things. Here we go. But then to practice, I'm like, this is terrible. Like, I might die. And now he's coming out on the other side of it, to where he's 4.5 and he can self-regulate and he knows the things to do. But those skills have to also, like, what are your choices when you're frustrated? You can't haul off and whack your 2-year-old sister. What are the things you can do to emotionally regulate? And he'll go sit down and do some breathing or count to himself, or, you know, certain things. Or sometimes he says, like, he needs to come sit by me and like hold my hand and calm down. And it's like, okay. And again, that's in my very best parenting days. There's other days where it's a complete zoo. But it's like, I'm seeing just kiddos who have never had to work through that uncomfortable space, or like the apathy with schoolwork of like, handwriting's boring, I don't want to handwrite. Well, yeah, it's boring, but it's a skill you need to have. So here we go. Come on, you can do hard things. And it's like, I have, you know, every teacher everywhere has dealt with kids who are like, I can't do this. I won't do this. This is too hard. And it's because, I shouldn't say it's because, oftentimes those kiddos just have not been provided the opportunity to work through something difficult. And there's a lot of confidence that comes through that. So I would encourage every parent, like, trust your kid. Trust your kid. It's okay to be bored. It's great for brain development. There's a ton of research. It's great to be bored. Sit in silence, and even quiet.
And even if you don't provide your kid with a personal device in the home, one thing I've seen made a big difference is just don't let your kid have access to turn on the TV. Like, just get the remote out of there. Like, they can't go to it without asking, getting permission. That's a big, like, small shift you can make that I think is really
important.
My
kids the TV's broken today, because I will say we do very, like, we follow the American Academy of Pediatrics. We follow their guidelines, but like my 4-year-old at this point, like, does probably watch 30 minutes of TV every other day, but we watch things, and like, there's a whole body of research on this too. High quality shows, like every educational show is not educational. It has to do with the screen change dynamic, and there's just so much there. But like, we watch shows from the 90s. Like my son, his favorite show is Little Bear.
No, cute.
You know what Little Bear is?
Slower pace. I do remember.
And they have, and we co-view a lot. Like, there's a ton of research on that, to like sit and talk.
Yes, great.
Like, and if there's ever conflict, we pause and we, you know, again, in my best parenting days, we'll sit and discuss what's happening. That's not always the case. But just being intentional about how you use that technology, being intentional about making sure that you're not placating your child or pacifying your child. With technology, I think that's the most important thing. Like, I would ask parents, because then it sets a precedence. You know, then from the time your child, if they've always turned to technology to help self-regulate, or when they're bored, that's what they do, or when mom or dad, and I so understand this because I'm in it right now, but when I need to get something done, here, I'm going to turn on
Mhm.
a show, or I'm going to do this, or whatever. But then you get kids who, in that critical sensitive period of 9 to 14, they don't have the ability to self regulate. Uh,
Mhm.
the mindless scrolling, and so it just sets a really dangerous precedent when you start it so early.
Yeah, and this new study shows that kids may have an increased dependence on digital devices, so tech addiction later on in life if you're giving it to them in those hard situations at home or out in the
Absolutely.
world.
And so one thing that I always tell parents, like our parent teacher conferences in my classroom often become like a therapy session. Like
Mhm.
I bounce things off them, they bounce things off me. I always have families that like, I have wonderful, amazing children in my classroom. And so I'll say, okay, like, what did you do so that I can copy you? One
Mhm.
of the things that a parent said to me once, who, like, in this child, I wish I could tell you she was the most lovely, amazing, articulate, mature, kind, just everything that you would want, just dream student.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
her mom said to me, like, well, we pretend like it's the 80s. We just hang out together in the house. Like, we're together all the time. Like, there's no going to your room with like checking out. Like, we hang out together all the time. And like,
Mm.
that really just kind of shifted my mindset of like, okay, if it were 1985, would my kid be able to do this?
Mhm.
And when you think of like digital literacy and the way you want your kids to use technology in their home, it's like,
Mhm.
TV today is not the same TV that it was in even the 90s. Think about, you know, sustained attention in the absence of rewards, which is what we want. You had to sit through
Yeah.
commercials. You had to wait until noon on Saturday for your favorite show to come on. Now you can
Mhm.
hit a
Yeah.
button and Netflix has whatever show lined up for hours on end. It's very,
Mhm.
very,
Mhm.
very different. And I think we as parents need to collectively say, this is different. We're dealing in uncharted waters here.
Pausing here to remind you that the Bark phone and the Bark app can help you protect your child from online harms. Parents do not have to be in the dark thanks to the monitoring technology at Bark. With the Bark phone, you can manage who your child talks to, what they access, you can block certain websites, set screen time limits, and so much more. And as they grow, you can add more features and give them access to more apps or dial it back to give them a breather. And if you decide to give your child an Android or an iPhone, please consider the Bark Parental Monitoring app, which is a high tech parental monitoring technology that can also protect your child. Back to my conversation with the wonderful Jessica Moore. Yeah, I love the idea of acting like it's
It's
the
the
80s at
80s.
home because your home used to be the safe space for your kids. They could get away from bullying. They would be safe, right? And
Yeah,
now home is if your kid has a device, especially in their bedroom, like that's the most unsafe space they could be.
that's one thing
And they can't get
I told a
away.
couple parents this past, well, not this past year, but within the past couple years, like, please get your kids' phones out of their room. Like, they're so tired. And again,
Mm,
there's no judgment with parents. These are like intentional, loving, wonderful people who I think it
mm-hmm.
just, without knowing any better, it's like, oh, you can have your phone, it's no big deal. And then it becomes catastrophic. Like sleep deprivation is something that I actually do see with my older kids. So I teach our advanced math.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of sixth grade curriculum, some seventh grade curriculum mixed in there. And I talk to kids constantly about that because they do have homework. There's a lot of rigor in prepping for middle school. And it's like, man, if you think you can do your math and multitask with a phone, or you've got your iPad on, or you're listening to a show, like, get that stuff out of your room and attune to a task. And
Mm-hmm.
I oftentimes will show them the research. Like, you can't multitask. And we as
Mm-hmm.
humans grossly overestimate our ability to multitask. And it's funny to see the
Mm-hmm.
research because, you know, I even sometimes will be like, I can do that. It's fine. No, you can't. You do both things very poorly. And there's
Yeah.
a ton of research on that.
Yeah. I have an interview with Dr. Gloria Mark, and she has a book called Attention Span that's really good about like
Yeah.
the myth of multitasking.
It's a
Um,
misnomer because it's like, I think, yeah, and it's just such, it's so indicative of where our world is right now. Like
mhm,
my husband and I talk about this all the time. You know, we have two young kids, and both of us, after a long work day, want to sit down. And I joke about doom scrolling, but it's
mhm,
like I cannot give my two children the attentive, caring response that they need if I have my phone around.
mhm,
And I wish that I could. I wish that I could be that parent, but I can't. Like I have to actively go plug my phone in elsewhere so
yeah,
that I can
yeah,
be present. Yeah.
yeah. We implemented a new rule where my husband and I put our phones in our bedroom. So when the kids are home, they shouldn't see us with the
That's so
phones at
smart.
all. And if they do, they call us out.
That's so
So
smart.
that's been, yeah,
I
that's been
had
helpful.
actually, and we try, like, we don't have a formal rule, but I, especially like, so I'm a teacher, I'm at home with my kids all day right now, just like for
Mhm.
a whole day.
Yeah.
I actually
Woohoo.
was doing
Yeah.
something work related on my phone the other day. I was checking my work email and I hadn't in quite some time. And my 2-year-old daughter came and smacked my phone out of my hand and was
Oh,
like,
yeah. Yeah.
wanted my attention with that. Oh, you
Yeah.
really, and like that. Okay, I got you, sister. What do you need? I
Yeah.
think that's one of
That's so lovely though that she did that rather than try to like grab it and use it,
oh,
right? She's like, "Get it out of here."
my kids who both are low tech, they don't have personal device. Like again, we watch very intentional TV every once in a while, or like a family. We've
Mhm.
just recently started a family movie night, which is really really fun.
Yeah, I love that.
They hate the movies that my husband and I check, but or choose, but we're working on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But ironically, like my son, who he just has a really intense temperament. I shared that earlier, but he's incredible. But
Yeah.
he, to this day, will ask about my husband's old work iPad. We let him
Mm.
on a flight a very long time ago, like we're talking
Mm.
2 years now,
Mhm.
um, do a
Yeah.
painting bear. It was like, it's like a coloring sheet, but you can paint on an iPad.
Mhm.
He brought me my husband's iPad that had been tucked away for, in our
Mm.
office, like I don't know, a week ago, and then just again yesterday saying like, I want this, get it open for me. It's so, where I'm going with that is it's so
Wow.
amazing to me, like this low tech kid, like
Yeah.
it's so addictive. It is so, he still is asking about it and it just blows my mind, and it's like, okay,
Mhm.
that's scary to me.
Especially for certain kids with certain temperaments, and that would be my son as well.
Yeah.
And
It's not
that's why it's
scary.
a no for sure, because that's all he wants to do all the time,
Yeah.
and I will have to teach him when we start introducing some technology, whatever that looks like, 'cause he's turning 7 this weekend, but I will have to teach him to manage tech because I don't want him to turn 18 and be like,
That's,
"Woohoo," like,
well,
and just
and
be
so
on technology all the time.
that's the tricky part, I think, for all parents. This weird climate that we're living in, of like, you don't want to, it's like sugar with kids, like you don't want to deprive them so much
Mhm.
that then it becomes this thing that's fascinating. And yeah, we're working through that right now too. And I think that's when you start having the conversation with kids, like,
Mhm.
not that you do, but I think I even find my own self discrediting my kids, not giving them enough credit, saying, he's only
Mhm.
4, but he can hear that, video games aren't great for your brain yet. You need to be a little bit older. That's a phrase that
Yeah.
I always want to hand to parents, is the phrase not yet. Not yet
Mm.
with
Mhm.
social media,
Mhm.
not yet with tech,
Yeah.
whatever, not yet with a
Mhm.
video game yet. It's not
Mhm.
always, not forever, but not yet. And here's why.
Mhm.
It's not
Yeah.
my decision, it's that there's research that says this is bad for you, you know?
Yeah.
And
And I know a lot of speakers in this space or researchers will talk about that it's for young kids. It's bad for your brain. It's bad for. I think there's something about understanding that it's bad for their brain
right.
that is understandable to them somehow.
I would agree with that 1,000%. And just saying, or talking to like my 4-year-old about like uncomfortable, because sometimes this is interesting too. He's a kid that gets very
Hmm.
little TV and very low stimulation within that TV.
Yeah.
We
Hmm.
choose what we hope are high quality programs, and he every once in
Hmm.
a while Nikki, like, will fly off the handle when it's time. Like, we do the countdown, we do a 5-minute timer, we do a 2-minute timer. I'm doing the inflection in my voice, everything that the research would say to do, and I let him turn it off. And he still, probably once every 5 times will have a complete and total meltdown. And I'll say,
Yeah.
once he's out of it and we can talk about it, I'll say, honey, do you know that icky feeling? Yeah, that's normal. That's hard sometimes. That's why we have to be really careful about how much we're using this. And I think, like, especially like parents of preteens, like my sixth graders, they're such cool kids. Like, they're cool people. You can have a conversation with them. I think so often that's such a tricky time of life because they feel like they're on this precipice of becoming an adult. They feel, especially some of the stuff some of them are exposed to, like they have real world knowledge, and just to be able to say like straight up, like, that is bad for you. You should not be on TikTok because you are at a critical period of brain development, and you are going to unconsciously compare yourself to every person you come across. And that's like, we talk about, like I do with my sixth graders, like influencers, like who are the people you admire? Like, okay, the social media influence, why do you like her? What qualities does she have that you like? Is she empathetic? Is she compassionate? Or is she just pretty? What do you like about her? And so having those frank conversations, is she, or even like within, you have to be really careful, but is this person popular, or are they powerful? Are they popular for the right reasons? Having those frank conversations with kids in an age appropriate way, it empowers them too. To say, if you feel like crap after you get off TikTok or Instagram, there's a reason for it. I tell the sixth graders in sixth grade boot camp, I say, you don't stand, like, if you feel like, there's a ton of research on boys when they are gaming, when they're playing Fortnite or World of Warcraft or whatever they're playing, when their parents make them get off. I'll say to them, do you ever argue with your mom? Do you ever yell at your dad? It's because your testosterone levels are through the roof, and you, like, that is a totally normal neurological response. Your central nervous system is in fight or flight, and you're going to act aggressively. That's normal. Like, you won't stand a chance against a room full of neuroscientists who have developed that game to have that response from you. You don't stand a chance. So just be aware of it. And I've had kids come back and say, like, oh my gosh, you're right, my mom told me to turn it off and I got mad at her. And it's like, it's just this really conversation to have and say, see, like, like, be smarter than the man.
How fascinating, these conversations with sixth graders.
Sixth graders are awesome. They're that's such a fun age. Like, and I tell parents, like, don't be intimidated by your kids. Like, don't, and what I mean by that is, like, I feel like that age group gets such like a bad rap of like, oh, middle schooler. No, they're phenomenal, and they're so easily, like, they want to do the right thing. They're so intrinsically good, and that's like why I feel so protective of their mind and like just their mental state. Like, no sixth grader is inherently hardwired for depression or anxiety. When I have like sixth grade girls say, like, I feel so anxious, it's like, okay, well, let's root through that. What's going on? And some kids, they really are experiencing true, sincere anxiety, and it can be, I have to be careful what I say. But other kids, I don't want to say it's social contagion, but other kids, it's like, honey, you're not anxious, you're just uncomfortable. That's normal. You just have coming up. That's normal. That is not anxiety. That's not a diagnosis. That's just you being uncomfortable. What are some skills that you can develop so that every time you have a math test, you don't melt down?
Yeah.
And
are you noticing more anxiety symptoms in kids that are on phones more?
Oh God, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we talked about that. I had, oh yeah. And again, no, like I said, like, that's no criticism of parents. That's no criticism of children. It's just the world we live in, that, like, the research is there. If you have a phone and you're a preteen girl, like, you're like again, I'm staring at a statistics that said there's been a 145% increase since 2010 in the percent of U.S. teens who had a major depressive episode. And that's from the U.S. National Survey on drug use and health. Like, that's not some made up statistic. That's longitudinal research.
And that's right when smartphones dropped, and right after was, Instagram, and the kids used Snapchat shortly after that. And so all of these numbers correlate.
Makes me actually, like, I don't know, and it blows my mind continually. Like, you have to listen to one episode of a parent that you've interviewed to be like, okay, I will never, over my dead body, will my child ever have Snapchat. And it's amazing to me the kids, how hard kids will push for it. And that's why, like, I would equip every parent to say, like, have them listen to one of your episodes of a child who is overdosed on fentanyl, or thought that they, or, it's just, I think, again, as parents and as educators, when we equip kids and say, it's not me making this decision, listen to how problematic this could be. There are no safeguards in place. I have to be your bumper here. I have to be your guardrail. Like, kids aren't stupid. You can show them that stuff.
Right. Snapchat is a confusing one for people to understand that it's harmful, because it's so doctored up to look like safe for kids, like a cartoon land. And so it's really attractive to kids because it's gamified and it's addictive, and things disappear so no one will ever see what I'm saying to my friends.
One of the things I hit on really hard in sixth grade prep, we can't call it boot camp anymore, but sixth grade prep, is that, like, if you take a photo on a phone, it does not go away, ever. It is somewhere. Well, and I would ask adults, like, do you know where your photos go? If you delete them, do you think they're deleted? If you delete your text messages, do you think they're deleted? Do you know about the cloud? Do you know how any of that works? It's confusing to even the most well-versed of us. And it's like, so, and again, like, I would ask any parent of a child anywhere, is your child impulsive? Why are you going to hand them a device that has the potential to ruin their life based on a lack of impulse control? I think,
which is totally normal for that age.
Yeah. And I think, you and I are the same age. I think, you talk about a prefrontal cortex. It doesn't fully come online until 25 or 24. I think about some of the dumb things, like, that I did as a child, or just things that I said. I think I talked to my kids in the class about this a lot when I was in fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. Like, things that I said unintentionally or intentionally, just to be mean, or something stupid. That was said verbally, and it went away, and you can make amends. Now,
well, and Snapchat says that it is supposed to be like a real conversation. You can say something and it goes away. We're not social media. We're like real life conversations. But we're missing the whole issue.
Right. Like, I tell kids all the time, I was on Snapchat and I was next to someone, or my friend was on Snapchat. I give this scenario all the time. I would take my phone and take a picture right there. Now I have a lasting record. There you go.
Right. So, it's as easy as that.
Well, and, like, parents, something I wish I could tell every parent too. I've had a lot of frank conversations in my classroom of kids bypass parent controls all day, every day. Google it once. There's whole Reddit threads. There's whole, it's on Apple, like the Apple forum, like how to bypass parental controls. And even there's some really phenomenal ones out there. But your kids can bypass a lot of things that you think, like, don't let that give you a false sense of security.
Yeah, especially on iPhones, which were not built for kids. And you've mentioned Gab phone and Bark phone. And I really like that we have new options. Those are only a year or two old now. So I think general society is just realizing that we have another option. And it's been really hard, though, to infiltrate at times, because everyone's such an Apple family and they want everything. And Apple has parental controls. But
or even just for the sake of, like, consolidation of a phone bill. I know I've had. I completely agree with you. I think I would tell parents, again, like, I think it has to be a greater conversation with our peers as parents, like with your friends' kids, so they're not a social pariah, so they're not alone on a desert island feeling, I mean, teenhood is isolating enough in and of itself, and especially preteens and adolescents. Don't
Mhm.
want to, exclude them. And that's why I think having a greater conversation, like be brave enough to share, like books, be brave enough to share your podcast. To if you're in this space at all, like we have to advocate. I've talked about like I would love to have like a parent meeting at our school and just say like the amount of problems that have come outside of school from cell phones based on a
Mhm.
text conversation that happened on Saturday, and now we're in class on Monday, and now we're having to muddy through that. And it's like, I'm happy to
Mhm.
do it. I'm willing to do it, but that's not what I need to spend my time on
Mhm.
as a
Yeah.
teacher. The amount of social emotional stuff that all of us are dealing with, like that just makes teaching that much harder. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, we don't want teachers' jobs to be harder. And that's, I think, definitely something I'm learning is teachers' jobs are made a lot harder by just kids having phones, let alone being allowed to have them at school. Does your school have a ban to
We
no?
Here's the thing: we have it in our parent teacher handbook. We're a charter. Phones have to be in a bag, turned off. And our kids are
Oh,
so incredibly, at least the kids in my class are incredibly respectful of that. And they know my stance.
okay.
Like it's like a running joke. Like
Yeah.
I have one
Yeah.
little girl, she's like, I said to her, I said, you know what I'm going to say? She goes, I know. You hope that it falls out of my bag and gets run over. Yes, I do. And so, no, I mean, every once in a while I'll have a kid come up to me and say, hey, I don't know if I'm a busser or if I'm a walker. Can I text my mom really quick? And I'll have them come up towards me,
Mm,
turn their back to the class. And yet, it's at the very end of the day, it's not disruptive at all. And
mhm.
I'm really, really grateful for that. But again,
Yeah.
I can't control what goes on outside of school,
Mhm. Right.
and that's hard.
And I think you should do that session with parents. I think the parents would appreciate knowing that. I mean, some parents may get defensive, but that's just a normal reaction
Well, and
or say, not my kid.
that's the tricky part of like where I just would ask everybody to look at their own experience. Like
Mhm.
there is zero judgment, but
Mhm.
I did so many stupid things as a kid, and
Yeah.
I thank God all the time. Like there's no lasting record of that, or there's no, or I didn't. You think of like the risky situations that we've all put ourselves in, having we're
Mhm.
in our 30s. It's like, man, what would that have looked like with a cell phone? What would that have looked like?
Mhm.
Or just again, they're just so dangerous. The internet is such a scary, dangerous place. And
Yeah.
I
Um,
heard someone articulate this really, really well, and it was what parents, prior to the cell phone, what parents had spent decades protecting their children from predators, strangers, cons-
mhm.
extreme consumerism. That's something that
Mhm.
I could
Mhm. Yeah.
speak on for days.
Yeah.
People who want to harm your children, we keep them, and the anxious generation makes um, a really incredible case for this, that we have overprotected them outside of our home. But then we give
Mhm.
them all of these scary things neatly wrapped up in a highly addictive device and say, here you go, I trust you. Use your best judgment.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, it's just,
Backward.
yeah. And again, it doesn't have to be never, but let's get you through your adolescence. Let's get you through your most sensitive period,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. In a protected way
Yeah.
because the social media companies are not protecting the kids.
They're
So,
doing the exact
um,
opposite.
right.
Exploiting
They're
children.
harming.
You're
Yeah.
actively harming your children. And I would ask a
Yeah.
parent to like examine your own, as an adult, examine your own social media use. That was something that
Mm.
was really hard to reconcile for myself. I'm
Mhm.
like, well, Facebook, how am I ever? I grew up in Washington and live in Alaska. How am I ever going to keep up with my friends? Well, you'll keep up with
Mhm.
the ones you want to, and you'll spend less time
Yeah.
being distracted in your real world. It's hard. We have to
Yeah.
model the behavior, and I battle that every single day in my own home. It's hard.
Yeah. But if you move those relationships with your friends as an adult to text messaging and phone calls and FaceTimes, it's much more quality time with that person rather than some post on Instagram that's to hundreds of people that's not personalized to anybody. And then you're
Well,
having these like face value interactions.
and we need
I got away from
that.
that.
And young
Yeah.
kids need, that's one thing when we have moved to this digital heavy childhood. That's one
Mm-hmm.
thing that also every teacher I know talks about, like kids are missing social cues because they aren't having
Mm-hmm.
that face to face time. The research in the anxious generation talks about that, about
Mm-hmm.
how catastrophic it's been for young kids to not have that face to
Mm-hmm.
face interaction. And we all, like anecdotally, we all know that. Like watch any area like where preteens and adolescents and teens hang out. Go to a restaurant
Mm-hmm.
and just watch people. It is bizarre to the amount of time that people should spend face to face connecting. You know,
Yeah.
we we are mammals. We are hardwired for that, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's crazy to me, and to see the research, because you can see it with your own eyes. Like, oh, this is so bad for
Mm-hmm.
everyone, but then to see the
Yeah.
research, it's like, oh, it's probably worse than we thought. Like, this really is harming
Mm-hmm.
kids. This is harming young children. We're missing, like, again, I can only speak to what I observe in my own experience, but a lack of empathy, a
Mm-hmm.
lack of
Big
being
time.
able to, one of my favorite people in the world, she's a really phenomenal educator that I've been able to kind of train under. She always says, like, we have to teach kids to disagree without being disagreeable. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like just the social media noise of, like, if you don't think like me, you're dumb or stupid, or you're uneducated,
Yeah. Yeah.
instead of like, we've moved away from, we can respectfully disagree, to now, if you don't agree with me, here. It's really interesting, and it trickles down.
Mm-hmm.
Watch any adult have a fight on Facebook. Talk politics with someone who doesn't think like you. It's
Mm-hmm.
wild.
No, thank you.
Yeah, right. It's, yeah, it's insane.
Oh, yeah. Empathy is a really interesting one, and the lack of it in younger kids. And there, did you see the case where some middle schoolers were bullying teachers, creating fake
Yeah,
TikTok accounts in
100%.
Pennsylvania?
Believe
Yeah,
it.
so briefly, if listeners didn't know about it, so middle schoolers in Pennsylvania created fake TikTok accounts as teachers and posted as the teachers just really like pedophilic content, homophobic content, racist content, horrible stuff. And you know, we found out about it and it was like in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, one of those. But what is your thoughts on that kind of behavior? Because I'm hearing it's happening more and more.
It's terrifying. Personally, I think it's terrifying. Yeah, it is problematic for a multitude of different reasons. But I think kids who, we have to counteract a generation of keyboard warriors.
Mm-hmm.
I have this conversation often. If you would not say it face to face, never,
Mm-hmm.
ever, ever say it online. And if
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't do it in face to face, and some kids are lacking that empathy piece where they would do it in face to face. And then we have to circle back around and say, well, let's talk about empathy. Let's talk about
Mm-hmm.
being a compassionate individual. How do you want to
Yeah.
treat people? Why are you
Mm-hmm.
okay with being abrasive or unkind? And then kind of hit it from another area. But as an
Mm-hmm.
educator, that is scary. And it's scary. There, I could go on forever. I have to be careful what I say. It is scary to live in a world where kids can say and do a lot of things. There's not a lot of
Yeah.
repercussions. We
Right.
live in such a litigious society that, and school districts a lot of times are afraid of parents, or what parents will do or say, or the pushback.
Mm-hmm.
What parents are, thankfully at my school and in my district, like, I'm very thankful that we have such wonderful relationships with parents for the most part. But every
Mm-hmm.
once in a while, there's a
Yeah.
sticky parent that it's like, there has to be a level of respect there that I think that has just, as a societal whole, has been slowly eroded over time. Teachers during COVID, we were superheroes, and then everybody got back to school, and it was like, well, you guys do more with less, and
Wow.
it's tricky.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
would implore every parent to be having conversations with your children about respect, and not blind respect. You don't, you have to challenge the man a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
I talk to kids all the time. There are people that you are going to come in contact with. Like, if a police officer asks you to do something, it is dangerous for you not to comply at times.
Mm-hmm.
If
Yeah.
a teacher
Yeah.
asks you to do something, you can very respectfully air your grievances, but you can't be
Mm-hmm.
aggressive, or you
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be. I mean, you absolutely can be.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
not a lot of pushback with that, but it also comes down to
Mm-hmm.
relationship, and that's what's so wonderful about having kids for 3 years is I love them
Mm-hmm.
and they love me for the most part. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm glad you haven't dealt with any of that. Sounds like
I have a
that's ever.
couple. I've had, yeah. I should add a hard parent one time that was really really tricky, and we just couldn't see eye to eye about, ironically, tech use. And so
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that was really really hard because, again, when you're dealing with multiple years of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one thing I wrote down that I just wanted to make sure that parents
Yeah.
hear. I'm sure you've heard. You read The Anxious Generation, but in 2023, the U.S. General Surgeon issued a public health advisory saying that social media poses, quote, a profound risk of harm to the mental health and well-being of children and adolescents. That's our U.S.
Mm-hmm.
General Surgeon. Full stop. Let that sink
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
Like,
I
I think
know. And nothing happened from there. That was 2023. I
I would
know.
agree that, again, I don't know any parent in the world that would be like, you know what, you want to vape, go ahead. I know it's bad for you, but
Right.
other kids are doing it here. This is going to have lasting
Yeah.
repercussions. And again,
Addictive, lasting repercussions probably will make you have depression, anxiety symptoms, could make you suicidal, but your friends are on it, so I'm going to
and
let
I
you
don't
use
want you
it
to be left
anyways.
out. So, and that's where I think as
So,
parents,
yeah.
we need to be having this collective conversation. Figure out who
Mm-hmm.
your kid hangs out with and talk to their parents. Pass these books around, advocate
Yeah.
for each other, make your home. One of the biggest issues with technology, especially for young kids, is it displaces the healthy activities of childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
kids that
Right.
should be little kids, our kids' age, my 2 and 4
Mm-hmm.
year olds should be outside, and they are a lot, and it's not easy. But climbing trees,
Mm-hmm.
running, jumping, experiencing risky behavior, mitigating risk,
Yes.
understanding
Big.
how there's so much developmental research on that's what kids should be doing, not inside staring at a screen. For
Yeah.
our adolescents and teens, they need face to face connection. They need real connection. They need connection with their
Mm-hmm.
family. I would ask every
Mm-hmm.
parent, what are you doing? And again, without sounding, that sounds really judgmental, and I need to be careful how I phrase that.
Mm-hmm.
Where's your intentionality to connect with your child? That your
Mm-hmm.
adolescent, your preteen, your teen is at one of two highly sensitive critical periods of brain development.
Mm-hmm.
They are
Mm-hmm.
attuned for connection. Do you want them connecting with you or some influencer that's going to drive up their consumerism and drive down their
Yeah.
self-worth?
Right.
Like
And
moms,
it's small.
moms
Yeah.
are we need your preteen girl is not the enemy. They need you so desperately.
Mm.
They might act like they don't want to connect with you. They need your influence so badly, dads. And again, not to get too heavily into genders, but dads, your
Mm-hmm.
boys need you. We need those role models.
Yeah. I think there was a study that showed that boys these days, teenage boys, are spending 30 minutes a week face to face with their dads versus 20 hours a week on their devices.
Yeah. And that is problematic
Mm-hmm.
for so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
I think of, and no one wants to talk about this, but pornography for young boys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what your children, that's one thing that I don't talk about that obviously at school, because that's really muddy waters I would never want to get into. But I
Mm-hmm.
want to tell every parent, there's a good chance your 13-year-old has seen porn. There's statistically they have, whether it's on the bus, whether it's on their phone, whether it's on their buddy's phone. You have to be having those conversations with your kids. If you see this, come talk to me. We'll talk about it. It's weird, I know, but I want you to understand that like there's research that it hijacks their sexual template. And pornography is problematic for so many ways, which we know. It's violent. It often depicts a power. I'm not going to articulate that well, but it does not present how we hope our children would have their first sexual experience. It is not the loving, consensual thing that we hope it would be.
No. And kids are they're not seeing like vanilla, romantic sexual experiences on the
it is. And that's where like when I read that the first time, my stomach fell from my throat, or it was like, because when I read that statistically, like I think the average age now, and it's hard because it's self-reporting, but like, isn't it like 10?
Yeah, it's 10 self-reported.
Yeah.
And that interview, I feel like you may have listened to it, with Kristen Jensen of Defend Young Minds. That is such a good one about kids and porn, and it's called Kids and Porn.
Yeah.
And
Good Pictures,
parents
Bad
need to
Pictures
know
is a
about
book.
that.
Like every parent order it. Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. It talks about age-appropriate conversations with your kids. But that's something as a teacher I don't want to be doing.
No.
And I think that as sometimes, like as parents, it's like, that's why we need a village. And it's like, we have to be brave enough to have those honest conversations. Or like, if your young son is on Instagram, his For You page is going to be full of things you do not want him to see with unrealistic body image. And his brain is attuned to hardwire to, that is what it's just so important that we have eyes on what our kids are seeing. And young girls too. I mean, I say all the time to girls, I'm like, no one looks like that in real life. No one looks like what you're seeing. And like our age, we saw it in magazines. Like I subscribed to I remember the magazines I would get, and I would compare myself, but it wasn't an endless stream of social comparison.
Fake.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like, that's why we have to be having these conversations with our kids. Like it can't, you have to share the information.
Your insight is so helpful, and I feel like we could talk for 2 hours minimum. Tell me, is there any thoughts, like to start to close out, is there any thoughts around what else parents should know? I feel like there's been so much that you've shared.
I'm rambling and I'm like getting emotional, and I apologize for that. But I just like, the biggest thing I would say to like, let's start from young kids up to adolescents. Your young kids, like I have a 2 and a 4-year-old. I understand what it's like to be in the throes of being bombarded with like, oh, download this app and your kid will learn their ABCs. Your kid's uncomfortable. Turn on whatever show. You need to get something done. I would encourage you to, as much as possible, when you as a parent are doing the laundry, when you're cooking dinner, either include your kid in that task, because they want to hang out with you. They want to do those tasks. It is not easy, and I am not a huge fan of it myself, but allow your kids to be bored. Oftentimes all it takes is self-starting that play, or helping them to start their play, and then they'll, like, my 2-year-old is not as good as independent play as her brother is, but I'll play with her for 30 seconds, get her engrossed in something, and then she's raring to go. So build those opportunities for your kids to experience that uncomfortableness and start to practice that self-regulation of being bored, of having to sit through uncomfortable feelings, not using technology to pacify. And then as your kids get older, delay. Dear Lord Jesus, please God, delay smartphone uses as much as you can. And the argument of, well, my kid needs a phone because I'm divorced, I have to be able to get a hold of them. Look into a Bark phone or a Gab phone, a safe phone. I have a kiddo in my classroom who has a Gab watch, and it's the coolest thing.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Like, it blesses me. And she's such a little angel with it. Like, she knows it's technology, and she's like, I know I shouldn't have this right now, and she'll leave it on my desk. It's like, honey, you're fine. Look into those alternatives and have conversations with your older kids about why you're delaying use. Don't
Mm-hmm.
just draw a hard line and not fill them in on why. Kids deserve to know this research. They deserve to know that they are the product. They are being harmed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is catastrophic for them, and we need to be communicating that as much as possible. And then
Mm-hmm.
finally, I want to encourage parents who, if your kid does have a smartphone, like, and the cat's out of the bag,
Yeah.
you can walk it back.
Mm-hmm.
You can walk it
Love
back.
that.
You are not powerless. Your children, your relationship. Be brave enough to say, I love you so much. I read this new book. I want to share some of the things. How can we work to walk back your tech use together? I don't want to be a hard line. I want to connect with you. I want to be your person, but I can't
Mm-hmm.
let social media influence you more than our family does. How can we work together to find either limits on tech use, or
Mm-hmm.
how do you feel about going to a gab phone? How can we work together as a family, and not using it as something to do this, to hit heads, but
Mm-hmm.
to come alongside your child and say, I love you. I want to support you. I might
Mm-hmm.
have made a mistake giving you a phone. How can we work together? What are your thoughts?
Yeah.
Right?
And there might be a period of weaning them off of it because it is an addiction, but they'll
Yeah.
get through that. And I've talked with like neuroscientists about this. Like they'll know when they start feeling better and actually less tech use, they'll feel
We
better
need
and
our
they'll notice the
support. I
difference.
think so often, like, we as parents, like, forget that, like, our kids need us. They want us. They, even if they fight us and, like, oh, you're the worst parent ever. I hate you
Mm-hmm.
for taking away YouTube. YouTube is so problematic. I didn't even touch on that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Agree.
this, yeah, you're such a bad parent. Like, you're doing it for the benefit of them. You, like, if I always say, like, if we gave our kid nothing but junk food forever, and then all of a sudden realize, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I can't in good conscience keep giving you junk food and never let you have a healthy meal. Like, you would never just be like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
my kid only eats cookies, sorry. Like, you would walk it back. Tech use is the same thing. Like, the data, I would argue that
Yeah.
the data probably would say it's more catastrophic. And then finally, the last thing I'll say before you and I end is, like, be brave enough to have these conversations with your adult peers.
Mm-hmm.
And the research, like, if you come, again, I always worry about, because my kids are young and it's really easy for me to say because I'm not in the thick of it yet. Like, I find myself
Mm-hmm.
hesitating to share things. And I think if we honestly come at it with, like, love and empathy for each other as parents, and, like,
Mm-hmm.
as a collective village of, like, we all love these kids together. How can we best help them? How can we best serve them? We want
Mm-hmm.
them to grow up into, self-assured, mentally healthy adults that are competent and well placed in the world, and what we do now will affect that ultimate adult that we send out into the world. And just being brave enough to
Yeah.
have those conversations, even though they're hard and they're counterintuitive to societal pressures.
Mm-hmm.
um, I find myself, like, my husband probably thinks I'm psycho because I talk to him about this a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
being brave enough to start, being brave enough, passing books on, passing research on, sharing it on your own social media, being
Mm-hmm.
intentional about that. I think we can change
Yeah.
things. I have hope that we can change things because, um, as much as I have optimism for the future, I don't think things are going to change in the big tech. I don't think the government's going to do much, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's hard, but it is going to take parents. I feel still hopeful about legislation if we can get enough parents on board.
I do
And
too.
that's
I
going
just,
to take
I should say, every time I get my hopes up, that I'm like, there's this piece that,
yeah.
it
Yeah,
hasn't
I
turned
know.
out great. But yeah, I'm with you.
No. Yeah, and I think maybe because I've only been in this space for like 9, 10, 11, 10 months, but I feel like I'm starting to realize the disappointment already of like, oh crap, like
No,
I thought
are we?
this was good to
I
go.
think I think my statement was pretty cynical. Yeah. I would refer and defer to the experts here, and every expert is saying this is harmful. I mean, our U.S. general surgeon, and I can't even believe
Mm-hmm.
that didn't make national news. There was not a bulletin sent out in every, you
Mm-hmm.
know, like, oh, you have a child in the U.S. Here you go. Like this, like the danger
Yeah.
warnings we get on our phones, like the tsunami warnings in Alaska. Like we should have
Yeah.
that, like big tech warnings.
There's some kind of separation. I mean, some kind of block there. Because I mean, I reported on that and I was like, this is huge. And I just
And
like
then it just figured out.
nothing. It didn't,
Well, when I read it in the
yeah.
book, I had to stop and I'm like, I'm sorry. Am I just tired, or did
Yeah.
I just read that and then how have I work with, I am with 12-year-olds all day. How
Yeah. Your school, like schools should have told all the teachers and the parents and sent out an alert about this. Like that would have been the trigger, you'd
Here's
think.
what I think about schools and school districts, and I know our time is going long, and I apologize. But I'll be done soon. I'll be done after this. I think it's like triage in school districts around the world right now, around the U.S.
Mm,
It is teaching is so hard. We as teachers are expected to be a behavioral counselor, a psychologist,
mm-hmm.
a parent in a lot of cases, an educator. The jobs that teachers do and administrators do.
Mm-hmm.
This is such a big piece that I think it's like we're desperately trying to stay above water right now in so many ways, that this is just
Yeah.
one more thing that it's like, okay, we know the research, like everybody implement it how you wish in your own classroom, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is something through this series to close out that I think that I want to make parents understand is how hard the teachers have it and that we just need to get on the same page and we can look at the research and we can look at the stats and the stories and make the same conclusions and then all make decisions to better the kids in class and at home
Yeah,
and their development. So I appreciate you taking the time to
my pleasure.
educate parents and just share stories because you have such a wonderful perspective and experience with kids that are at very um, influential ages and that
Yeah,
the decisions that we make in the home can really make a big difference and hand in hand with teachers we can make a big difference together. So
awesome.
thank you
Well,
so
thank
much,
you. Yeah,
Jessica.
thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for everything, and take care.